Hello everyone, hope you're doing alright. Today we're talking about the Serenity Shadow. Now, brief disclaimer as usual, I'm not an expert on this spec, I'm just a nerd that kind of knows what he's doing. If you have any recommendations, you can feel free to leave them down in the comments below and help out your fellow players. I'm sure they would appreciate it. Let's jump right into it. So, for your tertiary stats, you're going to be looking at that 110% accuracy, and then for your alacrity, you get to like 7.2% alacrity. That should compensate for most of your lag issues. And then just dump the rest into crit, and you should be ready to rock and roll. We do a lot of critting in this spec naturally, so you're going to be in for a very jolly good time. For your tactical, you're going to take the 2x trouble tactical. This is going to be proccing our dots much more often than we would be otherwise. Frankly, it's a lot of damage. So 2x trouble is going to be your go-to tactical. For your legendary, is going to take the force training package for like a flat 3% extra damage. It's pretty darn nice. We don't have to think about it. And then we're going to take the dynamic force package, which is going to give us more force potencies. It's pretty darn nice. Pretty mandatory for this particular rotation, but the foundations of this rotation will still apply to everyone. So, for your combat style, we're going to be looking at taking the balancing field. That way we get that extra 15% damage in all of our dots for about 2/3 of the time we have our rotation, which is pretty darn nice. Moving at the field here, these are all kind of bad. I like Force Wave because I like to troll people with the bindings, but that's just personally me. You can kind of take what you want here. Moving the line here, Inure is going to increase the crit chance of our dots by an extra 20%, pretty much throughout our entire rotation, which is pretty darn nice. Hollowing is just flat damage. We love to see it. Moving up the tree here, I like Intangible Spirit in PvE and PvP, but I know some PvPers like the Sturdiness or the Fade, so kind of dealer's choice here if you're playing PvP. If you're playing PvE, you have to take Intangible Spirit. I'm going to yell at you. Moving up the line here, these options are all kind of dealer's choice. In PvP, I like to take the Force Phase. In multi-target, I like to take the Lambast. And then single target, I like Kinetic Surge. So kind of pick your poison here. Moving the line, I like Resilience. It's just the most useful one for me. There are some fights we're going to have to take Force Lift, but for the most time, Resilience is going to be your best friend. And then in PvE, you're going to take Shadow Swiftness for the extra Assassinates, or I'm sorry, the extra Spinning Strikes, whatever they're called here. And then on the other side, we're going to take Cloak of Resilience for you PvPers. But that's about all you need to know for your tree. Let's jump right into actually doing damage. So Serenity is a dot spec. And what that means is that we have these damage over time abilities. So what do I mean by damage over time? Say I look at the Sever Force ability right here. Sever Force on its own doesn't do a whole lot of damage at the beginning. It does like 4k damage in the initial target. That's kind of sad. However, you're going to see that it's slowly doing damage over time. If you look at your target's debuff tray, you're going to see, oh, Sever Force is still on the target. That means it's going to continue to do damage. So a class or a ability like Sever Force will do about 35,000 damage over the course of the next 18 seconds. That's pretty darn nice. It's instant cast. It has no cooldowns. It's pretty darn good. It also roots the target for a second or two, which is it's nice. However, it's not as damaging as our Force Breach. Force Breach does about 40,000 damage over the course of the next 18 seconds. So between these two dots combined, we're doing like 75,000 damage over the course of the next 18 seconds in the course of 2 cooldowns, which is pretty fantastic. That's a lot of damage. All right, so Sever Force and Force Breach are your standard dots. You apply them to the target. They do damage over time. There is a third damage over time ability here, though, called Squelch. Now, Squelch actually does a whole bunch of damage at the beginning, too. It does like 15,000 damage at the beginning and does like 30,000 damage over the course of the next 6 seconds. However, unlike the other abilities, Squelch actually has a cooldown. So if I hit the Squelch button here, you're going to see it has like a 20-second cooldown, which means that we're not going to be able to spam it like we can with Sever Force and Force Breach. So that's kind of unfortunate, but we can talk about how we can make that a little more fortunate later. So those are our 3 dots. Instant cast of Sever Force and Force Breach. And then Squelch is still an instant cast, but it has a bit of a cooldown to go with it. You're going to notice as these dots are doing damage that our Spinning Strikes will start to glow. Spinning Strikes have a 30% chance of being procced by any damage over time ability that we do, so that way we can actually use it on any target at any health. Usually Spinning Strikes is only usable on targets below 30% health, but when it's glowing, we can hit it and do a boatload of damage, like 25,000 damage in a single cooldown. Not half bad. Not half bad for a dot spec. Additionally, there's another interaction here that we should talk about. For example, if we apply all 3 dots to the target, we're going to see that Squelch can go on cooldown. Oh, that's such a shame, that's such a shame. However, if we use a melee ability on the target that's affected by our dots, boop, Squelch will come back off of cooldown. This can happen once every 9 seconds. So that means that this 22-second cooldown for Squelch is going to be more like a 16-second cooldown, which is, or not even, I'm sorry, a 9-second cooldown. I did my math backwards. Be like a 9-second cooldown, which is pretty darn nice. It means that we can be applying Squelch much more often than we would be able to otherwise if we actually waited out the full duration of the cooldown. So those are 2 interactions we talked about so far. Dots, proccing Spinning Strike, and then melee attacks on the target, proccing our Squelch. There is another interaction here that we need to talk about. That is our Force Imbalance. Force Imbalance does like 15,000 damage on its own. That's pretty good. But when you use Force Imbalance, it's going to apply these stacks of Force Suppression. You can see them here counting down here. It applies 15 stacks at the beginning, and what it's just doing is giving you a flat 15% extra damage on your target for any time a dot ticks. It's pretty darn nice, and because of our rotation, it's going to be up for about 2/3 of the time throughout our entire rotation. It's pretty darn fantastic. Free extra dot damage. We love to see it. So, reviewing interactions so far. Dots on the target. Boop. Boop. Boop will proc our Spinning Strikes. Melee attacks on any target that has dots in them will proc our Squelch. And then Force Imbalance will increase the damage of our dots. Now there is one more interaction here that we have to really worry about, and that is the Force Potency. Force Potency will reset the cooldown of all of our major abilities. So if I hit Force Potency here, you can see the cooldown of all of our major abilities has been reset. Ain't that dandy? That means that if we time it correctly, we can actually decrease the cooldown of some of our hardest hitting abilities. Additionally, as you crit with all of your abilities here, you're going to see that Force Potency's cooldown is going to be dramatically decreasing over time. So it's not going to stay there at 30 seconds now. Hey dude, calm down. The more you crit, the more your Force Potency's cooldown will be reduced. That means your cooldown really isn't that long on Force Potency. It's pretty darn fantastic. Keep that in mind for later. All right, so dots, proccing Spinning Strike, melee attacks, proccing Squelches, Force Imbalance, making your dots do more damage, and then Force Potency, resetting the cooldown of all of our primary abilities. There are a couple more abilities that we need to talk about here before we think about building a rotation. The major culprit that people fall in the trap of is using a Double Strike. Double Strike is fine for leveling, but because of our tactical, it actually does less damage than an ability called Saber Strike. Saber Strike consumes no force, so it's very easy to balance your force management. It hits the target 3 times, which means that we get 3 extra chances to use and proc our tactical of 2 times trouble. So, when I say filler abilities, Saber Strike is our most important filler ability. It's going to consume no force. It's going to strike the weapon, or strike the target 3 times, and give us a whole bunch of chances for those procs. Additionally, we have Spinning Strike. Spinning Strike is going to be our second primary filler here. It does a whole bunch of damage. So when I say filler, we're thinking Spinning Strikes and we're thinking of our Saber Strikes. Serenity Strike is a trap. Unless you are at 30% or lower health, Serenity Strike will generally do less damage than its other counterparts. You can be using it. I've seen some people doing it, but as a general rule of thumb, it's just consuming a lot of force it doesn't have to, and not giving you the same amount of chances to proc our tactical. However, below 30% health, it actually becomes an execute. So when you're below 30% health, this also becomes a filler. So we have 3 fillers we need to be worrying about. The first is our Saber Strike, the second is our Spinning Strike, and the final in execute range is our Serenity Strike. Essentially, if you see Spinning Strike glowing, hit it, otherwise hit Saber Strike and you should be good to go. And then sub 30, you can worry about using that Serenity Strike. One last ability, I promise, is our Whirling Blow. Whirling Blow will spread your dots. So if I apply the dots to the target, apply dots, and use Whirling Blow, it will spread my dots to any other targets hit by my Whirling Blow, and that way you can dot spread to everyone and fluff those numbers and be the jealous envy of everyone else on the leaderboards. So that is the last interaction, is that it spreads your dots. So recapping real quick. Dots, proccing your Spinning Strike. Spinning Strike, or any melee attack, proccing our Squelch. Force Imbalance, increasing the damage of our dots. Force Potency, resetting the cooldown of all of our major abilities. doing critical damage is lowering the cooldown of a force potency. And then whirling blow is spreading our dots around. So, what do we need to do in order to maximize the amount of damage we're doing in a relatively straightforward fashion? Well, I'm glad you asked. We're going to build a very simple rotation here that's broken down into 3 sections. The first section is going to be apply your dots. The second part of the rotation is going to be balance it out. And the third part of the rotation is going to be filler up. So if you can remember, apply the dots, balance it out, and filler up, you will be able to do a boatload of damage as a Serenity Shadow. This is balance. This is Serenity, right? I'm calling it the right name? Okay, it's Serenity. For a second there, I thought it was balance. I had a panic attack. You can tell I'm not sleeping. So, let's talk about the first part of this rotation, which is applying our dots. Applying dots is going to look something like this. We're going to start off by hitting our force potency button. So force potency into force imbalance, into separate force, force breach, and squelch. So what we're doing here is we're setting up all of our dots to be exceptionally damaging because of our force imbalance. You okay there, bud? So, exceptionally damaging to the force imbalance, and then just applying our dots to making sure they're good to go, and then using our squelch. This will mean we have all 3 dots on the target. They're all going to have that increased bit of damage, and it's a great way to start. Ow, buddy, that's. Just because I took yours doesn't mean you have to step on mine, bud. All right, so force imbalance, separate force, breach, and then squelch. That's the opening 4 buttons in your apply dots. So let's practice it one more time. Force potency into force imbalance, separate force, force breach, and squelch. Let's talk about the second part of this rotation, which is going to be called balance it out. And that's because we're going to go filler, filler, balance, squelch. All right? So we've applied it out. So we're going to go filler, filler, balance, squelch. And so what we've done here, which you probably didn't notice because we're not doing this at full speed, is that we are reapplying our stacks of 15 force suppressions right as the first stack of 15 is wearing off from our applying dots section. So if we go through, we'll wait the 2 seconds here for all this to be reset, and we apply our dots. So we apply dots with force and balance, applying our 2 dots, and then squelching, and then we go balance it out by filler, filler, force and balance, squelch. We are maximizing the uptime of our force suppression to make sure that we are getting the most benefit out of those extra ticks of dots. So, one more time from the beginning, just to make sure we all are on the same page here, right? Apply dots, balance it out. So, apply dots, force potency, force and balance, separate force, force breach, squelch. Now balance it out with filler, filler, balance, squelch. Great. We've now gone through and reapplied our second stack of force and balance. We've done a whole bunch of damage to the target. Now we need to filler up. All right, embrace your inner Midwesterner and filler on up, because we're going to go filler, 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 squelch. All right, pretty darn straightforward. Filler, 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 squelch. Again, our filler abilities are Saber Strike, Spinning Strike when it's glowing, and then Serenity Strike when the target's under 30%. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be ticking a lot of our 2x Trouble Tactical. And then at the third ability of our filler ability, that will be reprocking our Squelch chance. So what we've done here is that in the opener, we apply our dots. Dots are running fantastic. When we use our first melee ability in that filler, Squelch will be coming off a cooldown. We'll go through, we'll do our force and balance, use a Squelch, and then we're going to fill, and on that third fill, that will reapply our Squelch cooldown reduction and let us use Squelch one last time. It's pretty darn fantastic. So let's see everything lining up back to back to back. So, apply dots, balance it out, filler up, all right? Apply dots, begin with force potency, force and balance, sever force, force breach, squelch. Now balance it out, fill, balance, squelch. Now fill her up. 1, 2, 3. Squelch has been procced. Boom. Now you're going to notice here that I got unlucky and my force potency wasn't back off cooldown yet. If this happens to you, you just have to get luckier. Yeah, just get luckier. And that way you too will be able to actually, finish out this rotation. If you run to the situation where you fill her up and then you still don't have your force and potency yet, that's fine. It's going to be all right. What you can do is just use your filler abilities until your force potency is back off cooldown, so then you should be ready to rock and roll. Now, we're going to actually kind of help solve this problem by applying our squelch as the first ability that we use and then going into our dots. So if you remember previously, we mentioned that force potency resets the cooldown of our primary damaging abilities. So if we open with squelch, that'll get that force potency ticking faster and faster and faster, so hopefully smooth out this rotation. That's really all you have to do for the opener, is just apply squelch and then begin in the dots section. So we're going to start and demonstrate this rotation back to back to back. Again, squelch in the opener, then dots, balance it out, fill her up, repeat. So, Duke, are you ready, boy? Aye, aye, Captain. I can't hear you. Okay, you're going to take my mouse. Cool. So, start off with squelch and then begin. Force potency, force and balance, cyber force, force breach, squelch. Now balance it out. Fill, balance, squelch, and then fill her up. 1, 2, 3, squelch, and then begin again. Balance, dot, dot, dot. Balance it out. Fill, balance, squelch, and then fill her up. 2, 3, squelch. Begin again. Force and balance. Dot, dot, squelch. Balance it out. 2 fills. Then a force and balance. Then a squelch. And then fill her up. 2, 3, squelch. Begin again. Force potency. Dot, dot, squelch. Balance it out. 1 fill. 2 fill. Force and balance. Squelch. And then 1, 2, 3, squelch. Repeat. If you can nail this rotation, you will be doing oodles and boodles of damage that your raid teammates will all be jealous of because they weren't smart enough to pick Serenity as their class. Do this until your fingers bleed, you don't have to think about it anymore, and then you too can do a whole bunch of damage. Just remember, dot, balance it up, fill her out, then you should be good to go. If you can do that till your fingers bleed, you should be fine. Again, in the opener, just hit the squelch button and then start from the beginning. We're going to do a whole bunch of damage. It's pretty darn fantastic. Let's briefly talk about our DCDs here. Hey, buddy, relax. I need to come over here. Shadow Stride is your leap. What Shadow Stride will also do, assuming you're taking the Stalker Swiftness Tactical or utility, is that it'll actually enable you to use your Spinning Strike, which is pretty darn fantastic. So if you want to use those more Spinning Strikes, you absolutely can by using your leap. Additionally, we have some very basic cooldowns here. Deflection will increase your melee and range defense by 15% or by 50% for 12 seconds, which is pretty darn nice. Because we are in Serenity, when we use our mass mind control, our damage reduction is increased by 30%, which is pretty darn nice. Depending on what utilities you're taking, you're going to get resilience, which is going to increase your defense chance by 200%, which is pretty darn nice. You're basically immortal at that time. And then finally, we have our Force Cloak, which will let you stealth out, and that way you hopefully do not get damaged by any abilities that are single targeted on you. But stealth is kind of weird this meta, so no promises. It'll just put you back into stealth if you really need to. If you're in PvP, please be hitting your taunt button, your mind control, and your mass mind control. It'll help out your friends and give you protection medals, which is very darn nice. If you're in PvE, don't taunt unless the tank tells you to. If you do, just prepare to face their wrath. All right. Gross, but that's all I have today. Again, dots, balance it out, fill her up, repeat. If you run into issues with force potency, just like Saber Strike once or twice until it's back off cooldown, you should be good to go. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. That's all I got. Thanks for being here. Like and subscribe if you want to. If you don't, that's okay. I don't blame you. It's a free country. You do whatever you want. Okay. That's all I have. Goodbye.